Twins, Basil! Have we got a show for you today? Today we have two Hobart N50s on our table. Now, both of these were shipped to us kind of at the same time, so we figured why not do the dynamic duo and repair them at the same time. This here is Greg. This is my service manager, and today we're gonna see if we can put on a little show for you. All right, so the Hobart N50 is actually, it used to be the Model G. So Hobart owned KitchenAid before KitchenAid was sold to Whirlpool. They sold to Whirlpool back in 1986. Now, as stated, the N50, it did used to be the Model G. This was one of the only patents that Hobart retained when they sold KitchenAid. And what they did is they rebranded the Model G into the N50. This is now the countertop commercial model that Hobart actually produces. And if you're curious, they do cost a pretty penny, coming in about $3,500 a piece. So both of these machines are facing different issues. We're gonna go ahead and start with this one real quick. We are in speed 1 here. We'll turn that on. You can hear it is a little bit noisy. Now, you cannot shift these models on the fly. You have to turn it off and then actually shift to the next speed and turn it on. Now, you can tell this thing is pretty loud. But I think just regreasing this machine can take care of that. There are some other little issues, like we have a split in the cord, so we will have to replace the cord. And then on this machine over here, it looks like we're having some sort of short. Let's go ahead and try and turn this puppy on. Okay, so we got speed 3, we got speed 2, we got speed 1. But after you run it for a few minutes here, we pop the breaker, we have no power. So we're gonna have to get in there, figure out what's going on with that. So the first thing we have to do here is take off this back cap. There's gonna be 2 screws in the rear that hold this whole cap in place. All right, we have the screws out. We're gonna go ahead and remove that. Now you can see these two machines are a little bit different. So this one has the strain relief right here. You have your ground cord, and then you have your 2 power wires. And those are just spliced together. Now, these machines are a little bit different. You can see here, we have the strain relief in the actual back cap, and then you got your wires just spliced together in the rear here. When we take a look at the second machine here, the power cord is actually running into the base of the machine. Now this just widely has to deal with the age of the machines. This one over here is a little bit newer, this one is a little bit older. It's just different ways that they manufacture these machines over time. All right, so we've gone ahead and we've taken those butt splices off there. Now these are gonna be easy to keep track of because literally it was just a green wire, a white wire, and a black wire, and we're gonna just put those with light colors when we go to reinstall this. Now if we take a look at this machine here, we saw that it had lost power there. This is actually a breaker fuse right here. That for some reason it is tripping. It has a short somewhere. All right, so we got the back cap off of this guy. We're gonna go ahead and do the same thing with this machine. We just got 2 screws here in the rear end. We're gonna go ahead and remove those. And with those 2 screws removed, we can just go ahead and pull away the back cap like so. All right, before we go any further here, we're gonna take a Sharpie and we're gonna mark this top wire. That's gonna allow us to know the difference between these two when we go to reinstall those. We'll know the one that we colored is gonna be on the top. Next, we need to go ahead and remove this entire rear bracket here. Now we can do that by removing these nuts. So there's 1, 2, 3, and there's 1 down here for a total of 4. And that is actually gonna be the same orientation on the new and old style machine. All right, we've removed all the other nuts. We're gonna go ahead and take this last one out of place. Now that should allow us to just pull back on this bracket and it should just pop out of place like so. Now this does have to go on in proper orientation, so you'll notice on the top right here, there is a hole. So we'll go ahead and make sure that that hole is on the top side when we install it. You'll also notice that the tabs for your power wires are gonna be on your left-hand side. Now, once we are at this point in the disassembly, we wanna grab these little posts here. We wanna make sure that all of these are tight. They shouldn't really wiggle. This one right here, it is loose. Take a look here. It gets quite a bit of wiggle when you move it back and forth. That just is a symptom of this nut right here being loose. So let's make sure that we tighten all of these down. So we really don't have to do anything else back here with this motor and field assembly. There are some screws that we need to get to. They are way up here in the housing. You see I'm shining, you see that flathead bolt up there? We need to go ahead and remove those. There should be 8 of those around this casing. Now, if we take note here, part of the reason why this machine is probably so loud, you see right there behind these black wires, that is one of those screws that's supposed to be all the way up in there. It has backed itself out and it's just kind of dangling here in the housing. So I went ahead and grabbed onto that screw with some needle nose pliers. It's just not in place at all. We're just gonna go ahead and pull that out of the machine. Now before we go too far removing all of those screws that are way up in there, we wanna go ahead and we wanna take the face plate off of this switch. Now there should be 6 screws around this thing that hold the whole face plate in place. If you look at the old one, it's gonna be the exact same thing except for these are flathead as opposed to the Phillips head. Now you can tell that this switch is just held in place by some locking nuts. So you have one right here and you have one just under this plate as well. Now to avoid having to remove these screws to take this whole little plate off here, we're just gonna use a flathead screwdriver. Give that a few turns just to move that up that threaded shaft. And then we can go ahead and tighten the back side when we're done with it to make sure that that thing is nice and secured. So now that we've gotten this switch nice and tightened up, you know, one of the reasons that this thing might have been shorting out is you notice this is an insulator right here. It's an insulating sleeve, and we notice it's kind of out of place, which is leaving a lot of this metal housing just kind of open. It is a possibility that this tab was coming into contact with that housing, allowing this to short out. So one thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that when we reinstall this, that this sleeve is just firm fitting in there, not leaving too much metal housing exposed, especially when it relates to the switch right here. Now also, these were kind of bent outwards just a hair. We did just kind of bend those in just a little bit to make sure that it's not going to come into contact. Now that we've taken care of the switch, we're going to go ahead and get back into this rear end again. We're going to get all the way up in the front. We're going to remove those body screws. It looks like this one right here is going to be our last one. Now we do want to have a partner when we're doing this because this front end, once those screws have started to be removed, can fall away. It's pretty heavy. There's a lot of gears up here. So just make sure you're being really careful. Now you can see with all of those body screws loose, we're starting to get some separation here in the housing. You could take a little rubber mallet, give it a few taps if you need to. Now that we have all those body bolts removed, we can go ahead and just pull this front housing away from the machine. Look at all of that grease. All right, so let's take a look at what we got here. So we have the transmission box here. You're gonna have several gears in that transmission box. You can see it is just full of grease. We're gonna come over here and we're gonna look at the motor housing as well. Basically, you have the motor that runs through, connects to this little spur gear right here, and then just a ton of grease plastered. This is really just a plate all around that. So all of this grease is going to have to be removed. We'll go ahead and remove all of this grease as well, kind of get these gears cleaned up, see if we can't find any damage or worn gears. Now before we go any further, there was a washer right here. This is a steel washer. It was sitting right here around this bearing sleeve right here. That actually goes right here. We don't want to lose that, so let's just go ahead and drop it into place. All right, we got the second machine pulled apart here. This is the older of the two. Take a look at that grease. It's just a nice dark brown grease there. Now, one thing to take note of, these are those mounting bolts. So we did not actually take those all the way out. You just want to loosen them enough to pull that transmission housing away from the motor casing. You can take these all the way out, but they're kind of a pain to get back way up in here. So the best way to do it is just to kind of leave those in place. So the next thing we're going to want to do here is really just to go through here. We're going to get all of this grease out of this machine. So we're just going to work to get all of this cleaned up. So this is what you're going to be looking at here when you get it all cleaned up. Really, you just have a back plate. Like I said, we got the spur gear on the motor right here. Otherwise, you just got a nice clean housing. All right, now that we have the motor housing cleaned up on this older one, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna move into the transmission here. Now, this big fat gear right here, this will actually just pull out of the machine like so. Now, if we take a look at the newer model, you'll see it's a little bit different in how it's designed. It's got a snap ring on top to hold this gear into place, but honestly, it should do the same. We just go ahead and pull that gear out of place like so. We'll go ahead and get this all cleaned up. Now to clean this thing out, we're just gonna come through here with our grease picks and we are just gonna pick as much of this grease out as we can by hand. And we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing with the gears here. We're just gonna clean up as much of this grease as we can. Now with these gears, we want to make sure that we pay extra special attention. We want to clean out all the grease between these teeth as well. We want to pay attention to each and every gear tooth. Make sure that there's no wear or no damage on these gears. Now these things look really nice. I'm not seeing any signs of wear or damage. Now this right here is one of the most satisfying parts. I absolutely love just scraping big old chunks of grease off of these gears. So as you can see, we've gotten quite a lot of grease out of there. We're gonna go ahead and keep moving and keep scraping. Just clean up as much of this as you can so you can kind of clear your field of view and just see what's going on in there. All right, so we got this machine fairly cleaned up here. Now what Greg has his finger on there, that is where the speed changer comes in. Take a look. It's just a little U-shaped little saddle right there. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna show you how these gears actually change. So he's gonna go ahead and move that into position. Oh, you see it kind of moves up. This gear moves up and down as you position that lever into each position. There we go. So we have first, second, and third position there. So now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and we remove this gear cluster right here so we can get a little bit deeper in this transmission housing. To do that, we have a spring right here. It is just hooked around this screw. You don't even have to loosen that screw. You can just kind of grab this with pliers or by hand. Be very careful that you don't actually let it go and let that spring rip into your hand. Maybe use a pair of pliers, but there we go. That is taken off. So if you take a look at this gear cluster here, the only thing that was holding that in place, you have the tension spring that was hooked here. You have, coming off of this side of this gear cluster, you have just a little square piece of metal right there that goes into this little channel. And then you have, you know, this little horseshoe style clip over here. That is all actually just gonna kind of pull up and out of place. So just kind of wiggle that around and you'll eventually get that to pop loose. There we go. All right, let's take a little closer look down into that transmission housing. You can tell there is just a lot of grease down there yet. We're gonna clean some of that out of there. Again, you're gonna wanna get in there, inspect all of these gears for any wear or damage. Clean as much of that grease out of there as you can. You're also gonna wanna do the same thing with your cluster of gears right here as well. Inspect all of the teeth for damage and clean off all of that grease. Now, not a lot has changed over the years. You're gonna have the same mechanics, the same mechanism in this old machine as well. So just repeat the same process. All right, if we take a look at this gear cluster here, you can see that we're starting to get it cleaned up here. Now, if I had a solvent tank, that would be a lot better, but we're just coming through here. We're picking out all of these gear teeth by hand with our grease pick. Now you can see we're starting to get these things nice and clean. All right, so take a look. We do have the transmission housing pretty clean. We got the gear cluster clean here. Now, take note here, so you're gonna have this square metal peg on the end here, and then you're gonna have your little shifting lever here. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna take this square peg, and we're gonna get it down and around this clip right here and into that channel. Gotta get those gears meshed up. Okay, it drops down into place there. Okay, and we're gonna twist that, and as you can see, simultaneously we also worked our shifter back into that saddle. That is how that positions into place. Now we just gotta get our spring in place. So now that we have that cluster back into place, if your spring did fall out, you'll notice that there's just a little tiny hole right there, and we'll just kind of loop that around and back through that little hole. And now that we have the spring hooked through that little tiny hole, we're gonna go ahead and stretch it out and get it right around its little set screw right there. All right, so now that we've got everything reinstalled, it is time to just start regreasing this machine so that we can get ready to put it back together. Now, in hindsight, we probably should have added some grease before we put this cluster back into place because it would have made it a little bit easier to get down in there to those gears, but we can still get plenty of grease down there. It's not gonna be a problem. So let's get started. What I meant to say was let's get started in the next episode. You know, we're running on about 15 minutes on this video. We're gonna go ahead and cut it here. We're gonna have a second half of this regreasing tutorial. So stay tuned for that. That's gonna be coming out shortly after this video. Now, if this video has benefited you at all, make sure to like and subscribe, guys. It really helps us out. If you need any parts, supplies, tools, grease, anything for your mixer whatsoever, check out our website, mrmixer.store. If we don't have what you need, we can absolutely get it. Now remember, we do mostly deal with KitchenAid mixers, so if you have a KitchenAid, we can definitely take care of you, but we are very proficient in these N50s as well. So if you're not looking to run that DIY route, you can send these machines into us. We can take care of you. You can also find all of that information on our website, mrmixer.store, and we'll see you next time.